Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today in our third in a series of discussions sponsored by the Valkill Partnership, the Open Society University Network, Bard College, and the Telwar Network. The Valkill Partnership is a friends group of the National Park Service that preserves Eleanor Roosevelt's home, which is the only national park dedicated to a First Lady here in the United States. The house is located in Hyde Park, about 20 minutes away from Bard College's New York campus. And Manuela, who's joining me here today, is the chair of the board, and I act as the board secretary. As we confront multiple pandemics in America of racism, COVID, and poverty, we are reminded of those who have come before us, people like Eleanor and their legacy. In order to understand what we need to do now, we need to turn to those who came before us to really comprehend what it is that their legacy has to teach us. I am currently teaching a class to Open Society University Network students. These include students from Kyrgyzstan, Bangladesh, Berlin, New Orleans, Queens, New York City. We ask our students to identify their historic mentor, to remind them of the legacy that we have of people who have worked on many of these issues for so long. One student quoted Martin Luther King: "If you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But by all means, keep moving." This is a reminder to all of us that we have both a role to play and a responsibility. This series, which will continue in the fall, allows us to think deeply about our historic legacy as we untangle what should come next. The speakers provide a wide range of perspectives and represent a diverse range of fields. The series sponsors include the Open Society University Network, which is a partnership between Bard College and Central European University and the Open Society Network, developing academic programs, supporting student and institutional civic engagement across geographic and demographic boundaries that includes research, network classes, academic programs, international mobility, and community partnership. The Telwar Network is an international association of higher education institutions that is committed to strengthening the civic roles and social responsibilities of institutions that has resulted in a global movement of engaged universities. It is my pleasure to introduce Manuela Roosevelt as the chair of the Eleanor Roosevelt Valkill Partnership, a private nonprofit that works in tandem with the National Park Service for the enhancements of visitors' experience at the home of Eleanor Roosevelt. The organization funds educational programs, lectures, and has raised more than $2.5 million for the National Park Service to assist in restoration projects at the site. She is the editorial director at Calway Arts and Entertainment, a publisher and cross-platform media company in New York City. And she lives with her family at Springwood, the estate where Franklin Roosevelt was born, that now belongs to the National Park Service. Manuela, turning the floor over to you.
Thank you, Erin. And we are deeply, deeply honored to have Jacqueline Novogratz here with us today. And I want to welcome everyone who is following us live from various points in the world, and thank Bard College and the Department of Civic Engagement and Erin and her team for hosting this webinar today. I think we're going deeper into crisis rather than emerging from it. And being together today is particularly inspiring. Jacqueline is an extraordinary individual, and you will enjoy listening to her. And I encourage all of you, please, to read her latest book. The book is called Manifesto for a Moral Revolution: Practices to Build a Better World. As Erin said, I am in the publishing business. I read endless manuscripts. I consider this book one of the most important books for this century. So if you have an opportunity, do read it. The chapters have incredibly inspiring titles. I've never seen a book with such chapter titles being published. So it is sheer happiness and inspiration for us to be able to spend some time with Jacqueline. We have a hard stop in an hour, so I will be brief so that you can all ask questions once I ask a few questions of Jacqueline. So our webinar series is titled Tomorrow is Now. And this is the title of Eleanor Roosevelt's last book, published in 1963. After she died in 1962. She wrote it and dictated it while she was very, very, very ill from her bed, suffering aches and pains and with a very faint voice. She was adamant, even though she had written more than 30 books, published more than 550 articles, having been in the public in the public domain for more than 50 years as an activist and as a moral conscience, particularly for America. But she insisted on writing this book because she wanted to leave a manifesto for the next generation, for all of you who have more tomorrows ahead of you than yesterdays, and encouraging everyone in the next generation to become involved today, right now, to make tomorrow a better tomorrow than we have seen. Jacqueline, I'm going to introduce you very briefly, even though you have a very, very large life. Jacqueline Novogratz is the founder and CEO of Acumen, whose inspiring motto is changing the world in the way in which the world tackles poverty. Jacqueline is a New York Times best-selling author for her previous book, The Blue Sweater, which I also loved and encourage everyone to read again. She was named one of the top 100 global thinkers by Foreign Policy, one of the 25 smartest people of the decade by the Daily Beast, I would say of the century, one of the world's greatest living business minds by Forbes. So we have somebody very, very important, and I encourage you to ask questions once we're finished. Jacqueline, what struck me the most in reading your book was how many similarities there are between your work and that of Eleanor Roosevelt, albeit far apart in time. Both you and Eleanor can be defined as activists and disruptors in the challenging and rewarding journey to bring intelligence to the world of the unseen and of the unheard. Claire Booth Luce said of Eleanor, "No woman has ever comforted the distressed or so distressed the comfortable, as Eleanor Roosevelt has done." Was Eleanor Roosevelt ever an inspirational figure in your life?
Thanks, Manuela. Thanks, Erin. It's so wonderful to be here. And it's actually a particular and unique honor for me, Manuela, to be at least virtually imagining myself with you at Val-Kill to speak about Eleanor Roosevelt, because she was always an inspiration in my life. In my generation of little girls, there weren't a lot of biographies that we were given of women. And I remember being a 10-year-old sitting in the library looking at this little row of yellow books, and in it were stories of Harriet Tubman and of First Woman, Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, and Eleanor Roosevelt. And the idea that there was a woman who stood for peace, who stood for human rights, who sometimes disagreed with her husband, and who spoke in a very firm and yet comforting. I love your image of her comforting the distressed and making the comfortable uncomfortable. I don't think I understood that as a girl, but as I grew older, given the many tensions that she held within her and how she used her platform to have the broadest possible reach, continues to be an extraordinary inspiration to me.
Thank you. So many of our students here today with us are deeply inspired by your journey from Wall Street to Acumen. The first chapter is titled Just Start. Eleanor Roosevelt similarly said, the best way to begin is to begin. Tell us about your start and your beginning.
Thank you. Eleanor sounds like a Sufi with that line. I really do believe it's about just start. And for me, as a young person who always wanted to change the world, having these heroines, I nonetheless had many of the realities that so many young people do around the world, and parents that were afraid of my being going into totally unconventional things right out of university. So I actually started as a banker, not understanding that even then, by working in 40 countries, which I had the privilege of doing, I started to see the power of using the tools of marketplace to build businesses and enable ideas to turn into action. What I didn't see was low-income people feeling any sense of welcome nor access to the banks. And so I guess the first step for me in just starting was curiosity. I would go into the favelas in Brazil and I'd see so much industriousness and creativity, and felt that there was this real opportunity. I had no idea what that meant, but my first step, which was a failure, was to go to my boss and offer the chance to create a program where we would actually lend to low-income people. That fell flat on its face. So I went outside the system, had heard about microfinance. It was a new, not even an industry, it was a new idea from Muhammad Yunus and others. And then I just followed that thread and started finding an opportunity where I might be of use in that sector. It was a long and winding road, Manuela, but I just kept moving. Every time I would hit a wall, I would find a window and climb through it. And I keep thinking, while there were many failures, there were heartaches, nothing would have happened had I not just started. And that is what I see young people doing today, and would encourage those who are waiting for purpose to realize that it's only by starting that purpose ultimately finds you.
Right. I think not knowing is a very inspiring beginning of one's life journey. We don't know. We think we know, but we don't know. And when we start, we don't know, but we want to continue along this path that we don't know. That's where the true answers arise. And that's, I think, been the same for you, but also for Eleanor. She did not know. She just answered that call deep in her heart.
She was an extraordinary seeker. And I think sometimes we're in a moment in history where you said, maybe even deeper in crisis, where so many of our leaders seem so certain, and yet look at the mess we're in. We don't know the world that we need to rebuild. We can imagine what it might look like, but the only way that we make that vision reality is to start understanding we have to get comfortable holding that uncertainty. And she was at another time when the world was needing to reimagine and recreate itself. And she was fearless in her ability to hold that uncertainty and keep moving anyway.
That's right. I mean, she lived at a time when the world was forced to contemplate what peace might look like after centuries of war. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was one of the most important architectural pieces of that piece.
It was extraordinary. And, I look again today, taking it to the modern context, at many of our leaders who are going to an old definition of peace, which is the absence of war. Eleanor Roosevelt understood a definition of peace that has deeply inspired me and my work, which is the presence of human fulfillment, flourishing. And that's a much harder peace to hold and to build. And yet that is the peace that we need to aspire to, again, in a new way, for a new world.
For those in the audience who have not yet read your book, can you tell us what Acumen is doing today to create a better tomorrow and your leadership role in this process?
Thanks. Well, my leadership role is always changing as a founder. So I actually started Acumen 19 years ago, which is hard to believe for me. As you said, our mission is to change the way the world tackles poverty. Essentially, we do three things. We invest the right kind of capital. So Acumen really believes in entrepreneurial personalities as the seekers that want to solve tough problems. It's important to get those seekers the right kind of capital. We have different types: long-term patient capital, which is philanthropy that we raise, and then we actually make investments in entrepreneurs that are trying to solve critical problems like healthcare, electricity, education, agriculture for the poor, mostly in South Asia, East, West Africa, Latin America, and for the past 5-6 years, the United States. The second thing we do is invest in the right kind of character, because one of the things that we have learned over these last 2 decades is that ideas matter. They are so important, but you need the right character to change the status quo, because it doesn't want to change. And so we've also been developing a university for all people who want to create social change, either as a for-profit entrepreneur, as a social entrepreneur, as a nonprofit, people in government, all of us. And then the third thing we do is really build community, because it is so clear to us that one of the ways we embed change is by creating not just networks, but communities of people who will bring what they can to each other in service of something much larger than themselves. All bound by these common values that, again, go back to Eleanor Roosevelt and the preciousness of every human being. And that's the world that we need to create, one that puts our shared humanity and the sustainability of the earth at the center of our systems, not just profit.
Thank you, Jacqueline. The third chapter in Eleanor's Tomorrow is Now book is titled Revolution. She explained that during her lifetime, revolutions took place on every continent: political, economic, ideological. Jacqueline, can you define the revolution of today? You have titled your book A Manifesto for a Moral Revolution. Can you summarize the ethical crisis we live in now and the way forward through a moral revolution?
Thanks. Yeah, I really grew up against the backdrop of 2 massive revolutions. One was the revolution of markets, particularly after 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell down. And the West confidently declared that communism had lost, capitalism had won, and it was game on. And that was a very powerful revolution that ironically was based in human freedom. This idea that the state shouldn't dictate who innovates and how we innovate, but that we should free individuals to do that. And you did see extraordinary change, much of it very positive. You also saw unbridled capitalism lead to a cruel inequality that has left us more divided and divisive than ever in our lifetime. Climate change that is at a catastrophic point right now. And then you saw the rise of technology as our second revolution, which accelerated open global capitalism. Again, technology has been an incredible force. Look at us right now on this call with people across the world. There are more cell phones today than human beings on this planet. We have a chance to know each other. Just as with unbridled capital in the technology revolution, we are seeing forces within it that can destroy us. And so the revolution of today must be a moral revolution. A revolution that, as I said, dares to put a new set of values, or an ancient set of values, in the center of our systems, our shared humanity, sustainability of the earth, not profit. that defines success based on how the vulnerable and the poor are treated, not just the rich. And that ultimately asks each of us to give more to the world than we take. And there again is another similarity to the words and wisdom of Eleanor Roosevelt. That this is a revolution of every company, corporation, government system, school, nonprofit, but also it has to start with each of us, and the way we see ourselves, in each other, and in the world we dare to create together.
Thank you for that. That's so profound to listen to today. And yes, there are echoes of ancestral wisdom. And, you know, your work is extraordinary, and I think you're extraordinarily inspiring for our students here with us today to be agents of change. Eleanor Roosevelt made change a driving force throughout her life, as you have. What can you tell our young change makers here about what the first step might be to become an agent of change? Where does it start inside you?
As I said, Manuela, I think it starts with curiosity. It starts with looking around yourself and seeing what everyone calls problems as just opportunities. And it can be big and it can be small. I mean, we're seeing in the streets today, young people everywhere saying enough and beginning to recognize how much they can do. Some of the people that have most inspired me along the way have been very, very young people. A 7-year-old that had a lemonade stand and sent me an envelope with $22 bills in it to say, I want to help solve the problems of poverty. And an 8th grade class at some point that decided it wanted to teach some of the principles of Acumen that were inspired by our companies. In fact, very, very young kids, we did a business plan competition once, Manuela, and they said, you know, Acumen brings hundreds of millions of people important things like healthcare and education, etc. But they've forgotten one really important element, and that is fun. And if you really want to be human, you also have to bring fun to the world. And so they had designed a company to bring learning games and other activities to kids like them. And I think this is also the way we spark the moral imagination inside ourselves, is to realize that it starts with each of us, wherever we are, with whatever we have. We just lost a friend and an Acumen donor this past week. And it's a funny story. And I hope it doesn't sound at all self-serving, but it shows also that we never know who we might be helping, knowing. I was waiting for a friend at a train stop, and I noticed an elderly woman on her bicycle, also waiting for the train, but I couldn't make sense of it in my mind. How was she bringing somebody home on her bicycle? And she didn't look very steady herself. So I just called over to her and asked her what her plan was. And she said that she and her friend would walk home. And it turned out to be about 3 miles away. And so I said, let me take you. That's so easy for me. You know, it's 20 minutes out of my way by the time I get home. And she allowed me. And I dropped her off. And she said, who are you? And I said, my name's Jacqueline. I work at Acumen. And that was it. And then 6 months later, I got an email, Manuela, and she said, you know, I looked you up. I looked at Acumen's work. I really believe in it. And I'm dying. And I wanted to put you in my will. And I thought, I didn't even know what to make of it. And from then, she became a friend and a partner. And we had her for almost 3 years. And we just lost her. But I was thinking about one tiny act, the kindness it released, and then how in her life and knowing us over the next 3 years, the kindness she released in my teammates who learned so much in knowing her. We need more of that.
Kindness is contagious, I think, as is courage. I'm so sorry about your loss.
Thank you.
But what a wonderful miracle
It was a
came
miracle.
from that meeting on the train platform on an unsteady bicycle. So I think we have many wonderful questions, and we're pressed for time. So I'm going to switch to students' questions for you. And again, I encourage everybody to read Jacqueline's book, because I think it is a kind of manifesto. You know, every now and then we see books that really change the consciousness of readers. And particularly in nonfiction, we as editors always ask, well, what is this book going to teach? What is this book going to do for the reader? And this book is a powerful, powerful call for change and inspiration. So
Thank you.
the first question is, what are the skills you think students need to develop to start their journey? And we covered a little bit of it, but are there, you know, is it courage? Is it self-inquiry? Is it curiosity? Is it, you know, what are the
I would say
five?
4 quickly, and I'm not going to do justice. The first is listening, which I don't think we teach enough in our schools. And certainly social media doesn't encourage it. We're very good at self-identifying, at even putting to the world an image of ourselves that may or may not be true. Truly listening, even to things we don't like to hear, is not only a skill, but particularly when working across lines of difference, especially with people who are less advantaged. Listening is an act of love. It's an act of hope that you are saying to another person without any words that their story matters. And that is a powerful starting point. In addition, you learn an extraordinary amount about yourself. The second one is linked, and that is identity. Right now, we're seeing the rise of identity politics, and too often, our leaders are using identity as a weapon to divide us. There's also a very powerful way of looking at identity as a tool to connect ourselves to one another, to recognize that each of us hold multiple identities within ourselves. But when one piece of it gets threatened, that's often the only thing we feel we are at that time. And others can also impose that identity on you. But what I've learned in working with many, many cultures is 2 things. One, how we see other people can set them free just as much as how we see other people can make them small. And so figure out who you are so that you can free other people. And the second piece is that that we have, you know, it sounds trite, but to find those ways of connecting with other people where you have a part of their identity in you, even if it is completely not apparent to anybody else in the room. And so that's another really important skill, particularly in an interdependent world. The third I touched upon, but it's holding opposing values, beliefs, truths, intention. Right now, we're at a moment in history where we have many competing belief systems. And what we often hear is mask, no mask, wall, open borders. We're screaming at each other, but we're not listening to each other. And while there may be a right, the only way we get to a community where we actually make change is to recognize a truth or even a partial truth in what the other side is saying and open a space. And in that space becomes the opportunity for the moral imagination and the reimagining. And that, in many ways, is the most important skill of all, moral imagination. Too often we use the lens of only our own imagination, even when we're designing solutions for people whose lives are completely different from our own. Moral imagination requires that we see other people as equal to ourselves. importantly, that we don't idealize them, nor do we victimize them, but we see ourselves in each other. And then it requires getting close to them, immersing in their lives so that you can understand the structures that get in their way and be honest about where they might hold themselves back. That skill allows you to recognize the mess of today, but also to see the future that we want to build and start to move toward it in ways that are both idealistic and pragmatic.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I hope I'm not freezing. My connection is a little bit unstable.
Oh, you're great.
Okay, thank you. Second question. Well, I want to go back to identity because Eleanor Roosevelt was famous for being able to talk for 30 minutes and never pronouncing the word I. So I've always wondered, was that a trick for her to open up and listen to even her enemies more deeply, rather than put I first as a protective liminal space between herself and others?
I think that is so powerful.
Yeah. The second question is, how do you train your fellows? What does that look like?
Well, first, it's how we select our fellows, which is we have fellows programs in East West Africa, Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, Malaysia, Spain, the UK just starting, and in Colombia. And in each of the regions in which we operate, because some of those go beyond those specific countries, we identify a core of 20 fellows per year that are deliberately diverse across race, ethnicity, religion, class, tribe, caste. And so we have a cohort that becomes one another's teachers. We spend a lot of time diving into some of the kinds of questions that Manuel and I are talking about, both using ancient texts as a springboard for real conversation, so that there's a muscle developed about disagreeing and understanding your own values from a place of principles. We spend a lot of time on understanding self as well, doing a series of exercises so that we can both understand our stories as well as share our stories, not just the bright sunny spots, but the harder parts, which is also an exercise where our fellows start to see each other, understand. We do a lot of work around what we call adaptive change and resistance to change. Where do we get in our own ways? Because if we're not willing to disrupt ourselves, it's really hard to become a real change maker in the world. And this is, Manuela, where you talk about courage, so that they can build courage. And we help them understand the issues that are going on today from the context of these pillars, self, cohort, community, so that they can better make real change in the world. What it is not is a mini MBA, and the way that we try to amplify and allow for that is we have Acumen Academy, which is our World School for Social Change, which we've had about 1 million signups for already. It's a platform where people anywhere, anytime can take courses that include many more of the more specific skills of how do you do lean startup? How do you design from a human-centered perspective? How do you measure what matters, not just what you can count, etc.
That's so impressive. 1 million students learning these.
Probably 500,000 students, but 1 million signed up for it.
Incredibly impressive. The third question is more personal. Did you ever come to a moment where you thought you could not go forward?
It's so funny. That question just made me emotional. After the Rwandan genocide, I had, as Manuela said, I had started a microfinance bank with, importantly, a small group of Rwandan women. And it was the most loving work of my life and most all-encompassing, And I had also started a bakery with 20 women on the side. And when the genocide happened, this sense of life being out of control was horrible. Knowing how many people I loved who were murdered was also horrible. And also confronting that some of the people with whom I had built an institution for social justice had played out every role of the genocide, including planning it, turned my world upside down. And to see how we could go from that to total destruction. There were times when I thought, not just what is my work for, what is all of the work of so many, where did it get us? And I never thought I would stop, but I definitely asked myself these hard questions about is violence inevitable? All of these, big existential questions. And yet, a couple of years later, when I went back, mostly to try and understand how could good people get involved in genocide, I also saw that women with no leadership at this point were literally like picking up loans made by the bank, pieces of paper on the ground to put this thing back together. And that they, as individuals, were contributing where they could with what they had, which by all accounts was nothing. And that they rebuilt a country which today has more women parliamentarians than any country on the planet, which is seen as a miracle on the continent of Africa. Change is possible. And one of the benefits of getting older is that you have an expansive history now, that we see that what we do as human beings is we rebuild, we reconstitute, and that those who make the change are those who are willing to get up in the morning and keep going, even when you feel broken.
Yes, the Rwanda story is, I think, a beacon of light in the history of the world because of the deep destruction of the fabric of society and of individuals, and then the rising through the stitching together again of that fabric of society. And I think as human beings, we're really frightened by the power we have to go from the deepest agony, either self-imposed or imposed on others, and the highest states of enlightenment. And that range is so vast that it's truly difficult for us to own and contain. And yet we see it being played out daily everywhere. There are no international boundaries to suffering. There are no international boundaries to well-being. And those two, that whole range has existed in this world since the dawn of civilization and will continue to exist. So, as you say, putting us and our morality and our heart and our spirit into everything we do is the sine qua non of existence on this planet. I don't know about other planets, but on this planet, it needs all of us.
It needs all of us.
The fourth question is, what initiatives do you see young people taking up that you think are the wave of the future?
I love that question.
It's a wonderful question.
I am seeing a complete reimagination of how we solve our problems that is fully non-ideological, nor does it work in silos. And so I'll just give two really quick examples. One is from Pakistan. A young woman, a doctor, Sarah Said Khurram, who wanted to solve the problem of terrible healthcare for low-income women across the country. And so she built a company that had 26 health clinics with link to a technology platform so that the 30% of women doctors who stop practicing after they marry could actually use their talent to support other women in the country. And there's a lot of status quo there that you've got to get through, because all of us like to see doctors face to face. And while it's changing in many parts of the world, we'll do telemedicine, many people still prefer to see doctors in person, particularly for low-income people. They want to see the doctor. They want to, if they're going to pay something, they want to get a pill. And so Soar also had built an app where you could just do direct consultation on the app, but nobody used it. When COVID came, Pakistan declared private health clinics non-essential. They had to get shut down. So suddenly all she had was her app, and she was fearless. And so she made it free for everyone. And in one or a few days, they went from 50 consultations a day to over 1,000, and it was growing. Then she reached out using all of these tools and technology to bring other doctors from across the country to volunteer now. Now it's all volunteer. And then people started volunteering from New Zealand and Canada and the United States. And so she went to government to get permission so that those doctors could also work with low-income people across the country. And literally within the span of a month, you watched a company become a public-private citizen partnership where everybody could bring what they could to create change. And I'm watching that happen. As you said, it's in every country. There's no bounds here. A new level of creativity and a focus on solving problems in a way that allows more of us to engage in, that I find deeply inspiring. And I could give you 50 examples like that.
That's wonderful. Really, what a wonderful story. And it will grow from there. The next question is actually related to this in a sense. How can young people get involved internationally in this difficult moment?
Well, again, this is where technology is so extraordinary. And even in so much as just having conversations with people across the world, there are so many acute needs right now. And this is where countries are all going through the same thing with COVID and with enormous economic displacement. But the difference is that for countries where there is no safety net whatsoever, people who were dependent on doing jobs where they made $1, $2, $3 a day now literally have nothing and are starving. And so there are so many organizations right now that just need even small bits of support so that they can keep their neighbors alive. And so that's the easiest way right now, is to learn and get involved. But again, through Acumen Academy, I'm seeing, we're doing a master course, Manuela, on my book, so 12 weeks long. Big commitment for people. And we'll run a second course for people who are interested in September. It's called The Path to Moral Leadership. But there's about 2,500 students taking this course, and they're finding each other across the world. And my dream is that we'll start to see collaborations coming out of that. When we had the courses before, there was a Pakistani who took one of the courses and ended up with a young person from Sierra Leone. The Pakistani guy really wanted to bring his technology knowledge to the team because they all kind of fell in love with each other. And so did it at distance for a year or so, and then got so excited by the opportunity that he moved to Sierra Leone and helped the other team create a tech hub. And so there are huge opportunities, but I would start with being curious, learning, seeing what others are doing. If you can, contribute to them. If you can't, just keep learning and find ways that you might be able to contribute using other parts of yourself, your network, your connections, spreading the word about what they do. And again, the step will lead to another step.
That's wonderfully inspiring. The next question is, what are the biggest obstacles to poverty? I remember when I was a young teenager, I thought, why does poverty necessarily have to exist? I mean, is it a construct? Of course, you know, we want to imagine a world without poverty, but what do you see are the current obstacles that prevent?
Well, the biggest obstacles go back to the moral revolution. I would say it's complacency.
Mm-hmm.
We have the skills, we have the tools, we have the understanding. We lack the will. It's bureaucracy. It's the corruption that is connected to the status quo. And by corruption, I don't just mean breaking the law. I mean constructing systems that have been very good for a few and not the many, and reinforcing it. To really break down poverty, I look to so much of the work of the Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, the Indian economist, who understood that we make a big mistake if we look at poverty only in terms of income. That poverty is actually the lack of human dignity. It's the lack of choice and opportunity. This, Manuela, also goes back to the Declaration of Human Rights, that we have to understand that what keeps us not free as individuals is a combination. Money, yes. And so finding ways to get people access to income and jobs and ways to take care of their problems is important. But it's also the big structures like healthcare, education, electricity, that if we don't have access to these in ways that we can avail ourselves of, then we will be left without the real ability to contribute. It also means then we have to look at the political poverty that we face, that we're seeing a breaking down of voice and freedom of expression. There's growing, and you're seeing this happening right now in many countries in the world. We're seeing, look at Hong Kong right now with a new security law, that these kinds of freedoms that are being taken away from people also end up hurting the poor the most. And we have to pay enormous attention as we're seeing ethnic groups being targeted. In the United States, real systemic racism in our financial industry, our education industry, our health industry. And so it's complex. You don't have to take on every piece of the system to be part of changing the system. You do have to recognize that at the end of the day, we are the system. We're all part of it. And it will require structural change, and it will require individual change. And so to be clear about the different pieces of it. But I go back, Manuela, to what we need right now is to address our poverty of spirit if we want to truly eradicate poverty in all of its material forms.
That's right. I think spiritual poverty is one of the illnesses of our time. And people often ask me when they come to Valkill, they say, well, how did Eleanor regenerate? Given that she was such a fighter out in the field. And the way she did it, the regeneration of the spirit is indeed important for all human beings, but particularly all those who are engaged in systemic change. And she did it by being with friends, by swimming, by horse riding, by going for walks quietly in the woods with her dogs, by talking to her grandchildren and family. So I think the importance of being together happily with each other is a good harmony to maintain while the outer world is in such deep crisis as well. Now I have two related questions. One is for you as a former banker, does capitalism work, or do we need to change the financial structure completely? And the other one is working the system really how change can happen, or do we need to abandon the system altogether? And we have just 10 minutes, so I want to address all questions. But those two is, this is very much a question for the next generation.
This is absolutely a question for the next generation. And I think the answer will be both. To the question around capitalism, where I would stand is that capitalism needs to be reimagined. That there is a power in markets to allow for freedom, for individual freedom, and yet not at the price of exploitation and of exclusion. And so the way I would go back to this one again is holding tensions. That we deny the generative potential of markets if we see it all as bad or all as good. And again, we can change it. And so I'm seeing a whole new generation of entrepreneurs that are changing the system, but using the good parts of the system. If you look at the chocolate industry or the coffee industry, traditionally for hundreds of years, whatever global prices dictate are the prices that local farmers pay. So if the price of coffee, which is normally set in Brazil, is very, very low, even if you have a scarce crop of coffee in Colombia right nearby, that's the price you get paid as a farmer. And so you might not even cover your own costs. So we have a system that literally puts all of the risk on the poorest and most vulnerable members who participate in that system and frankly make it possible. And with chocolate, 5 million farming families constitute 90% of an industry. That's about $100 billion. And those farmers are not getting even the tiniest fraction. 90% make under $2 a day. These entrepreneurs are flipping the model. They start with understanding the farmer's costs. They agree to a price that allows them to have sustainable lives. Some of them are bringing them into the systems with ownership and revenue models that are allowing them to build skills so that they can fully participate. And they're working. And they may not be as profitable in the short term, but these are the kinds of role models and business models the world needs. I'm seeing models in the circular economy that are taking our waste and regenerating them for products that others can use. And so you're outside the system in that the innovation comes typically from the smaller players. And I would put Acumen in that same category when we started. As you grow and get big enough, you can influence the bigger system. And so I think that that is one real way. There will be systems that need to be dismantled and rebuilt. The question is on what principles? And that is the conversation we still need to have so that we are both protecting community as well as enabling the individual to soar. And I'm seeing far too few conversations that start with the principles that drive the solutions that we want to build. And I think that is the work for now as we reimagine what could be.
Thank you so much. So we have 5 minutes and we have a few more questions.
Why don't you give me 2 or 3 of them and I'll try to go really fast this time.
So one is, how do you share values, considering how different cultures are around the world?
They're so smart. They're not asking me like, oh, like this. One is, how do you share values?
How do you share values? Can you talk about some of the young people you work with? Then a big one, how do we redistribute wealth? And the last one is, how can you write while you're working? How do you know when you have a good idea for a book? It's a budding writer.
I might skip that one. I'll let you do it as an incredible editor.
So values and redistribution of wealth. And so let's start with those two, and young people. Stories about young people.
You have to model values, which is why we have to have better role models. We have to teach values and be willing to say the hard things to each other. I can tell you so many stories where I've actually, hammered somebody, and the first response to me is, you talk about love all the time, Jacqueline, and you don't love me. And I'll say, no, let me explain. This is what love looks like. I love you so much that I am flying here to sit with you and telling you how you're getting in your way, because I want to accompany you so that you can be who you want to be. We have to model it. We have to talk about it. We have to be uncomfortable with it. I work with the most amazing young people on the planet. And what sets them apart is they're seekers. They are, they're unafraid to try new things and to fail and to get up again. They have the character that makes them, in a way, countercultural, and that they are willing to be really uncomfortable and sit with it, and do it for a very, very long time. We call Acumen the Hotel California, because once we've got you, we never let you go. You may leave Acumen, but there's this sense that we need to think about our rights and what it means to be part of a community, but to have real belonging, so do we have responsibilities. And so they teach me more than I could possibly ever teach them, but I try to model who I want to be. And
Redistribution of wealth.
Redistribution, I say that this is where, as government, we need to think about these same principles. What would it look like to define success for a nation if we put at the center our shared humanity and the sustainability of the earth while we're protecting the vulnerable? That will have implications for our tax policy, and a wealth tax that says, can I give to the world and not just take? That would have real implications for how we make capital available to those who have been left out. The way that we look at how we could provide real endowments for our universities that are historically Black in the United States, and this could go for other countries as well. Again, we have the tools. We understand monetary policy, tax policy, social policy, but we are not applying them from a place of principle. We are applying them from a place of politics. And when it's about politics, then it's about me. Going back to Eleanor, when it's about principle, then it's about the holding of tensions that won't get it right all the time, but will be clear about the community and the nation and the worlds that we are trying to build. And so it goes back to the moral revolution.
That's a wonderful conclusion to our talk, and we're right at 10 o'clock on East Coast, so we're so grateful, Jacqueline, for your work, for your passion, for your courage, for your intelligence, and the beauty and meaningfulness that you spread all around you. So thank you. I am sure everyone here has been inspired. We all want to be change makers at 10:01 and re-engage with change and use your vote wisely. Do vote, do get engaged, do everything you can to make tomorrow, today, and work for a better tomorrow. Thank you.
I couldn't have said that better. And if I could just one final word, which is when you said that Eleanor sustained, I also sustain in nature and in exercise and in friends. And one of my rituals is to jog up the West Side Highway to visit the Eleanor Roosevelt memorial at the opening to Riverside Park, and to just honor her, because we stand on shoulders of those who came before, and it's to us to renew those values in ways for our times. And now this is a time for a new generation to take those same values and renew it for your time. And so again, to end where we started with, just honoring all of you, Bard College, the chance to be here with you and Erin. And I wish I could see all the students, but I just wish each of you great, great luck in whatever you do. And yes, please vote, it matters.
Thank you so much, and be well, be safe, and we'll be following you through your website and through your book as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. Thank you so much. Really, really
Thank you.
wonderful.
Bye, everyone, for now. Until next time. Bye-bye.